we have an amazing Sicha Beis and Chelek Chaf Beis on Shmini, and we want to say Mazel Tov to, I just want to check because I didn't write it, so give me a minute, just checking. To Yosef Yitzchak Kravisky, whose Upsharanish is tomorrow. Our classmate, Aliza, and her husband should have, and all of Klal Yisrael should have enormous nachas from him. And there should just be simchas for everyone. And of course, we continue to learn for the schus of all those who have to be returned to us. And they should be returned immediately, complete in body and mind and spirit. And all those who need a refuah shlema should have a refuah shlema. And all those who have to be returned to their homes should be returned to their homes with menuchas hanefesh. And then they should bring the geula already. Aleph. HaMeseches Hacharena B'Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. In the last Mesechta of Mishnayos, Meseches Uktzin, Asekes Befrate Hadinim de Tumas Echlin V'Tumas Mashkin Haniskorim B'Parshasenu. So Meseches Uktzin deals at great length with the details of Tuma, of ritual impurity that visits upon food and upon drinks. And this idea of ritual impurity is mentioned in our parsha. And the last halacha in this mesechta is chalais dvash. When we talk about honeycombs, when we talk about honeycombs, so the question is, me'emasai mitamos mishum mashka. So in order for something to contract ritual impurity or to impart ritual impurity, it has to be wet. So when is it considered susceptible to contracting tuma because it is in a liquid state? So Beis Shammai the Beis Shammai opines, Mishayeharher, from when you begin to think about the process of liquefying the honey from the honeycomb, and Lefi Girsa Acheres, and according to a different version of the Mishnah, is Mishayecharcher, from when you smoke out the bees, I think, so that then you could go in and get the honey. And Beis Hillel Oimrim and Beis Hillel opined Mishayirasik, from when you break up or when you crush the honeycomb. Okay, so that's the last halacha in Meseches Uktzin. Now, L'das Beis Shammai, kasher ha'adam meharer b'machshavtei lirdais hadvash. According to Beis Shammai, when a person just begins to think about extracting the honey, miyad chol al hadvash din mashke, v'hu nitma b'tumas mashken. Immediately upon the conception of that thought, the honeycomb already has the halacha of something that can contract impurity because it is liquid. Masha Enkin, in contradistinction, LeBeis Hillel, according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, hadvash mitame mishum mashka, honey can only become, or the honeycomb can only become impure because it is liquefied, rak mishayirasik, only when the honeycomb is actually broken up, when it's actually crushed. Kasher hunasa mashke b'peil, when it actually becomes liquefied, actually, so that the honey begins to flow from it. Ulahalan, the Mishnah Haba, HaMishnah Hachrena B'Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, and then following this halacha, which is the penultimate Mishnah, in the very final Mishnah of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, Isa, it's written, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Asir HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil l'chol tzadik b'tzadik shloish me'ez v'asara elames. In the future, Hashem will grant, or Hashem will bequeath, or Hashem will to each tzaddik 310 worlds. Shen ne'emar, as it says in Mishlei, lahanchil oyhave yesh, va'etzresehem amale, that Hashem will bequeath to his beloved yesh, and the gematria of the word yesh is 310. Va'etzresehem, and their storehouses he will fill. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said. Amar Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, and Reb Shimon ben Chalafta said, "Leimatza Kadosh Baruch Hu kli machazik bracha liYisrael." Hashem did not find a receptacle, a conduit for bracha, ella hashalom, except for shalom. Shalom is the ultimate, the quintessential kli, receptacle for shalom. Shenemar, as it says, Hashem oiz la'ama yitain, Hashem grants strength to his nation. Hashem yivarech es ama b'shalom, Hashem will bless his people with peace. V'tzarich lahavin, and we have to understand. Mahi hashayches ben hamishna hacharena, ma'amari Reb Yeshua ben Levi, Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, u'ben hamishna shelefanea machlekes be'Shimon be'Shamai u'Beis Hillel b'negei l'chalis dvash. What is the connection between the very last Mishnah of the whole Shisha Sidrei Mishnah with the Mishnah that has that halacha, the last halacha in Meseches Uktzin, about the machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, relevant to honeycombs and when they are considered in liquefied state, so that they can contract impurity that is only contractable when something is liquid. So to answer this question, the Rebbe says Harambam v'oid mefarshim bi'aru. So the Rambam and other commentaries explain lefi shehishlim kol dini hahalacha, because once you finish all the halachas in the Mishnayos, tasam hadvorim bigmu. So then the Mishnayos finishes up with the subject of reward. Hainu, meaning shemishna zu achein eina ba behemshech l'teichen mishnah shlefanea. It's true. There really is actually no connection between this this plukta, this argument between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai as to when the honeycomb is able to contract tumah. There's no conceptual connection. Ella hiba kasiyim kol sidrei Mishnah, but just so happens to be that that's the last halacha in the Mishnayos, and then comes this roundup that if you're going to keep all of these halachas, this is how you're going to be rewarded. Kidei lahaidia bechasimas hamishna matan schorin shel tzadikim shelaimdim umekaimim kol ma shekasav b'mishnah. In order to let us know at the very conclusion of the Mishnah what will be the reward for tzadikim that learn and observe everything that is written in the Mishnayos. Okay, so that's the opinion of the Rambam and other Mefarshim that don't go looking and crawling and contemplating for the conceptual link here, because it doesn't exist. Something has to be the last halacha, and then at the end of all the halachas, the Mishnayos is coming and telling you that if you learn all this and you do all this, there's a lot of reward in store for you. Aval, but the Rebbe says, Lefi ma shematzinu b'Gemara b'kama mekemes, but aligned with what we have found written and taught in a number of places in the Gemara. Shenizbar tam hasmicha shel mishnah zu lezu afilu kasher nemru zu achar zu b'shtei mesechtes. The Rebbe says that there are a number of places in the Gemara where the Gemara does underscore the connection between the Mishnayos as they follow each other, even if they're not in the same Masechta. So this would mean the connection between the last Mishnah in one Masechta and the first Mishnah in the next Masechta. And how much more so does the Gemara pay attention to this when you have Mishnayos that follow each other in the same chapter? Therefore, Afal Pisha Tam Harambam Betakfai Amid. And therefore the Rebbe says seemingly there is place to find a connection between our two Mishnayos, which is again the Mishnah about the Plukta, the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel vis-a-vis when the honeycomb can become ritually impure because it falls under the category of a liquid, and the last Mishnah, which talks about the reward. Afal Pi, the Rebbe says in parentheses, although Shatam Rambam Betakfai Emet, that what the Rambam says remains steadfast. Al Kopanim Lahamtik, we're going to look for a connection, at the very least, to explain somewhat the connection. V'yesh loymar, we might say, sheteichen haMishnah hasmucha l'siyum haMishnayos b'inyan schar haMitzvos. We might say that the content of the Mishnah that is adjacent to the one that talks about the schar, with which the whole Mishnayos ends, which is the Mishnah that contains Haplukta bein Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'negei l'chalos dvash. It contains the argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel relevant to honeycombs. Yesh lo shayches le'inyan schar mitzvah hamedubar b'siyum haMishnayos. The Rebbe is going to show us that there is in fact a profound connection between the seemingly abstruse conversation about when a honeycomb is rendered susceptible to tuma. Like, really, how many of you have lost sleep over this particular issue, in the last, 10 years, but how the Rebbe in his unparalleled way is going to show us how this is very connected to the whole idea of the schar that is delineated in the last Mishnah of the entire Shisha Sidri Mishnah. Beis, Seif Beis. Uvehektem, and we're going to have to preface with Hahasbara b'divrei hamaforshim hanal, shesiyum Shisha Sidri Mishnah b'ma'amarim hanal hu k'dei lo'idea inyan matan schar shladikim. T'lachaya eina move. So we're going to preface this by first going according to the idea that the last Mishnah is all about reward, that it comes to notify us about the reward. And the Rebbe says, seemingly, there's something that really cries out for explanation. And what is that? Halay medubar kan b'tzadikim. Right? The Mishnah tells us that we're talking about tzadikim. Ba'amdam b'siyum Shisha Sidri Mishnah. And they are at the end of the service of completing the Mishnah, meaning Shleimus b'limat haTorah, Klalos haTorah shebal peh, v'loy oid ela ba'ofen limudei shel tzadik. They have concluded the whole Shisha Sidri Mishnah, which means that this is the completion of limat haTorah, the entirety really of the Torah shebal peh, which is all based and built on the foundation of the Mishnayos. And it's not just like a pedestrian learning all this, but they learned it as tzaddikim. Ve'im kain, and if this is so, l'ch'er pashut amuvan shehim bevadai kvar higiu la'efen havoida shal pitzivui hamishna kaidem l'chein b'seder nezikin b'sham shenasarav shaloyal menas l'kabel pras loy l'shem schar ela l'shma. So what's going on here? The Mishnah is coming to say that if you're going to do this all, you're going to get the schar, but we're talking about such great people who have concluded learning the whole Mishnayos, and they've concluded learning the Mishnayos like tzaddikim learn. And seemingly, it would be very simple and plain for them to understand that in conformity with a Mishnah that they have already learned in Pirkei Avos, which is part of Seder Nezikin, that a person is supposed to serve Hashem not to get a reward, but just lishma, because you want to serve Hashem with no reward. So then why would the last Mishnayos, the last Mishnah of the Shisha Sidri Mishnah, come and reward tzaddikim? It doesn't behoove them. In other words, the whole thing seems out of place. They should be on a level where there's no discussion of reward. And then this is what the mission is ending with. The whole Mishnayos is ending with offering a reward. Zeisvei, the Rebbe says even more. B'pasuk shehuva b'mishneh zu gufa. In the pasuk that is cited as a proof text in this last Mishnah, Nemar, lahanchil oy yesh. This is the pasuk from Mishlei. To bequeath to those who love me, yesh, the 310 worlds. This means elu sha'evdim es Hashem me'ava. We're talking about people who serve Hashem out of love, not because they want a reward. There's nothing utilitarian here. It's all about love. Dahainu mini, k'fi shemevar Rambam Barucha, shem oivdim es avedasam lishma, loy l'shem schar, ela oisa emes b'pnei shehu emes. They serve, they offer their service only because they want to do what Hashem wants, not for any type of reward. They do the truth because it is the truth. I'm constantly sharing this with my students, that, I don't, if and when I do make dinner for my husband, I don't do it because if I don't, he's going to beat me, God forbid. But if I told him that I do it because if I make him dinner 3 times in a row, it takes me to Cancun, that's only slightly less upsetting and pathological, because you do things as acts of service because that's what you do for people you love, not because you're going to get rewarded, not because you're going to get punished, but because that is in and of itself the emes of who you are, what you are, why you are, and what you want to do. So then the Rebbe is saying, so why is it here that the Mishnah seems to be kind of almost dumbing this whole thing down and saying, well, for tzaddikim, here's your reward. And in parentheses, Rebbe says, Amnam, however, Misha Isa emes mipnei shehu emes, muftach like kedivir Rambam Sham, sheseif hateva lavoi b'galala. One who does good and does truth, because this is the truth, then the Rambam explains that at the end, yes, this person is promised that good will come to them. But this is not what that person is after. It's true that there will be reward as a consequence of this avodah, but this is not why the avodah is offered. Be'enei oived Hashem me'ava, inyan seif hatava love biglala, hu rak davar tafel utstadi. The fact that for the person who serves Hashem out of love, the fact that there will be good that comes as a consequence is secondary and very tangential. The ha'ikar be'enav huma shezoicha la'avoid es Hashem l'shma. The main thing is that this person merits to serve Hashem for the sake of serving Hashem. It's like if somebody were to ask you, how much does your best friend's mother pay you to spend time with your best friend? That's a terrible insult to both of you and your friendship. Because the reward is that you get to spend time with your best friend. Need to be paid? So I was saying, like, the reward has got nothing to do with oy havai, with people that are serving Hashem out of love. So once we establish that the main goal of avodas haTorah mitzvahs is simply because you want to be best friends with Hashem, because you love Hashem, איך מתאים הדבר שבשים כל 6 סדרי משנה, כלומר כשעומד האדם במצב של תכלס ושלמות נעלה בעבודת השם וכולי. So how is it possible? And how does it behoove this whole study that at the end of the whole Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, meaning when the person is standing at the zenith and at the completion of their service of Hashem, Tia hachasima loy b'kach shenafshi kshura ba'avas Hashem. So the end, the ultimate teaching here should be not about how the soul is connected to Hashem through love, which is what the Rambam describes about such a person, but rather that this person is going to get a reward of 310 worlds, as a reward for all the service in Torah mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says we're forced to say that this discussion in this last Mishnah about inheriting 310 worlds, this is not to be understood in the conventional way as a schar, as a reward for mitzvahs. Tashlum al olamais avor avodah laHashem, that this is recompensance, that this is payment of these worlds because of what you did for God. Elazuhi shleimus na'alis ba'avodah, but rather that this is the culmination and this is the crescendo of all of the avodah. It's not a reward. It's the alighting onto the highest level of the reward. Aliyah, it is coming to this high post. Asher eleh magia ovid me'ava al yidei avoidasai. It's a consequence of his work that he comes to this place, not a reward. Gimel. V'zuhi nekudas hashaychus be'mishnah zu lemishnah shelafanea. And this point of understanding, what does it mean when it talks about reward? This very point frames the connection between the previous plukta, the previous argument, pluktas beis Shammai beis Hillel b'chalas dvash. This is actually the lens through which we're going to be able to understand what is going on here between beis Hillel and beis Shammai vis-a-vis this urgent matter of honeycombs. Echad hatamim al derech haremez lekach שההלכות האחרונית במשנה חיתם המשנה שהכל הולך אחר החיתם הם בנוגע לדבורים ודבש. So one of the reasons, at least on the level of remes, of what is being alluded to, that one of the last halachas of the whole Mishnayos, and the Rebbe says, and the Rebbe always reminds us of what it says in Gemara Brachos, that everything goes according to the end. You know, that's why, I mean, like Joni, because she's a really fantastic cook, will pay a lot of attention to dessert, and other people who are very, you know, Martha Stewart, because that's the last thing of the meal. That's last impression. So you always want to end with like a bang, because everything is going to be judged by the end. So what's the last halacha in all Mishnayos? It's about bees and honey. And the Rebbe says, and what does this allude to? Hukevan shedivarim beramsim kibir chazal, because bees allude in accordance with what Chazal taught us, l'shleimus ha'avoda, to the ultimate way to serve Hashem, which is avoda l'shma, to serve Hashem just for the sake of doing what Hashem wants, and not for any personal gratification or personal reward, etc., etc. So I put a link into the chat. It's actually quite fascinating to look at how honey is produced by bees. And I know nothing about science or any of this, but I could read English, Baruch Hashem, and we can all. And when you look, it's absolutely fascinating. In a beehive, there's only one fertile bee, but there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of female infertile bees, and they all have to go out, and Hashem created them with like a straw-like feature of their anatomy with which they suck out the nectar from flowers, bring it back to the hive, and they pass on this nectar. First of all, begins to break down by their enzymes, but then they pass it on to hundreds or thousands of other bees, and this gets regurgitated. So all these bees are working and working and working and working, but they're all part of a larger collective. They're not taking away anything for themselves. They're all doing this gathering for the purpose of the honey that will eventually materialize from all of the harvest of the nectar and the pollen. And then there are bees that have to dry out this combination with their wings, so that you ultimately get the honey. But the point is, all of these bees are working selflessly for a larger goal. And it's a pretty amazing thing. So the Rebbe says that that's what's being alluded to here with the metaphor of the bees. The avodah zu, and this kind of selfless, egoless, altruistic service, hi hachana v'hakdama lekach she'aseh Akadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil l'kol tzadik v'chulei. This is the preparation, and this is the preface for what will happen in the future, where Hashem will bequeath to tzaddikim 310 worlds. Hashlemus she'aleh magia adam al yedei avoda ke'avodas hadivorim. This is the completion that a person is able to attain and to reach after working like bees work. Ubisvaris pluktas beishame beis hillel zu b'chales dvash, and in the two different opinion in this argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Now, skip the part that's within the hyphen for a moment. So the Rebbe says, in these two opinions, Tamun is hidden and is buried. Hevdel v'chiluk b'chlalos inishal mataras brias ha'adam alei aretz, is hidden the difference, generally speaking, the different opinions about the whole goal and reason for why a person was brought into this world. Okay, so in the argument between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai regarding the honeycombs is hidden the profundity of why a person comes on this earth. Now, let's go back. So the Rebbe tells us what is the conceptual difference between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The Rebbe says that the difference, asher hi noivas k'moshen isbar kama pa'amim me'achiluk hakloli bein shitotsehem. The Rebbe has remarkable sichas where he traces that all, and he teaches us, and he reveals for us that the difference between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is consistent in all of the machlekes. In other words, they're not disparate machlekes, as disparate as they may seem. It all has one unifying feature. Im azlinin basar b'koyach. If we go by or we focus on what is there potentially in potentia, or azlinin basar b'poel, or we go by or we focus on what is actually there. So ladas Beis Shammai azlinin basar b'koyach. Beis Shammai is always of the opinion that you go according to what is there potentially. For instance, you light 8 candles on the first day of Hanukkah, because in potentia there are 8 days before you. V'lachein chol al hadvash din mashke miyad b'sheyacharcher afilu misheyaharher. So that's why the honeycomb already has the halacha of something that is liquefied and therefore is susceptible or vulnerable to becoming ritually impure from the moment that you start the process of smoking out the bees, or even from the moment that you start to think about starting the process. Ki b'koyach harei kvar mashke, because potentially it's already liquefied. Afal pisha davar adayin rochek miliyos mashke b'poel, even though it's far from being liquid, practically speaking. Ki b'koyach, because potentially harezek kvar mashke. It's already liquefied. I'm sorry, I did that. Uladat, so that's Beis Shammai. Uladas Beis Hillel, Azlin and Basar b'Poel, but in accordance with Beis Hillel, that goes according to that we focus on, or we go by what is actual. V'lachein ein lidvash din mashke ad she'aseh mashke b'Poel mishe yirasik, and therefore, according to Beis Hillel, no, the honeycomb is not susceptible to tuma as liquids are until you actually crush or go through the process of breaking the honeycomb and the honey comes out. The Rebbe says, in this is tamun hahevdel v'chiluk bechlalos ha'inish shel mataras brias ha'adam alei aretz. In this, what seems to be such an abstruse and maybe unimportant, completely difference, is hidden the reason and the goal for the creation of the human being on the face of this earth. And what do we know? The stated goal, the Gemara tells us, is Asher nivresi l'shamish es kaini. We were created to serve our master. Umemela, gam, and therefore, also in this is hidden hevdel v'chiluk b'negei l'shleimus ha'adam al yidei avadasai, is the difference vis-a-vis the perfection of the human being through this service of serving our master. V'lachein. Therefore, dafka achar hakdamas pluktas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel hanal yuvan bituv yoiser siyam hamishnayis asik baruch lahanchil. So it's only through understanding the difference between the argument of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai vis-a-vis the honeycomb, the practical or actual vis-a-vis the potential, that we can understand the last thing that the whole Mishnayos teaches us about what Hashem will give us at the end of time. In other words, we understand what comes afterwards by understanding what's occurring during our journey, our sojourn, our time in this world. And now, Rebbe says, we have to look at this more carefully, because now we're not just talking about a honeycomb and tumah, we're talking about who we are, what we are, why we are. And the Rebbe is now going to unfurl this for us. Dalet, Lashon HaMishnah, Lashon Ktsara, Ubetachlis HaDioki. In general, the Mishnayos was written very concisely, very, very distinctively. And what's the lashon that we have in the last Mishnah? It says, "Asid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil chulei shai elamis." The term that is used is that in the future Hashem will bequeath, Hashem will, Hashem will confer, Hashem will grant these 310 worlds. Ulachayr, and seemingly, ech neifel kana lashon lahanchil. Why would you use this term here? Inyan shel Yerusha. The word lahanchil is always linked with inheritance. But why would you bring in the whole rubric of inheritance? Hala Yerusha eina ba'a bischus avedasa shel hayerish. We know that what's distinctive about inheritance, it's got nothing to do with the work of the ear. Im rak noiled bekurva shel yerish, harihi yerish b'derech memela. If you're born as a close relative to the inheritor, no, how do you call the one from whom
bequeather?
A bequeather, thank you. So if you're born a close relative, then it just flows to you naturally. It flows to you automatically. It's not about what you put into it. V'imkein. So if this is so, kasher medubar al matan schoron shel tzadikim, if we're talking about what tzadikim are getting as a reward, hayatzarich li kasev asir kadosh baruch hu litain. Then the term that should have been used here is Hashem will give, not Hashem will bequeath, or some other term that denotes that this is relative to the work that you put in. But no, the term that the Mishnah uses is one that is removed from any overture or effort that the person puts in. And the Rebbe says, and even more interesting or kind of bewildering is the fact that that this, in fact, this very teaching Huva b'Meseches Sanhedrin is also brought in Sanhedrin, v'achein sham, and there, interestingly, in fact, Ne'emar, it is said, Aseh Akash Baruch Hu litein l'chol tzadik v'tzadik shai elamais. Over there, it actually uses the term litain to give, and here it uses the term lahanchil. V'yesh leimer habir shehi hanaisenes. Rabbi says, and we might say that the explanation is actually found in this difference. Hamaimra, because when you look at the context and you zoom out and you look at the difference between where in one place you're using the term lahanchil and in another you're using the term litain, you see that b'Meseches Sanhedrin shenemar al yidei ha'amoira Rava bar Meri achein koi b'schar mitzvos, because in Sanhedrin it's talking about a reward for mitzvos. V'lachein nemar by Aseh Akash Baruch Hu litain. There it's talking about reward, so it says Hashem will in the future give. Avol b'Mishnah zeu, but in this Mishnah, haba kesiyum v'chitum ha'mishnayos, which comes as the end of the entire Mishnayos, hanidun enoi schar hamitzvos b'pashtos. Here it's not talking in the pedestrian sense of reward, ela hashlemus she'aleha magia hatzadik al yidei avodas me'ahava. But here it's talking about the completion, the crescendo, the zenith to which a tzaddik alights after having served Hashem out of love. V'lachein diek Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi leimar Aseh Akash Baruch Hu lahanchil, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was punctilious when he uses the word lahanchil to bequeath, because in fact, this completion or crescendo or zenith to which this person arrives is similar to the construct or rubric of inheritance. And the Rebbe is going to explain this more deeply in the next Seif Hey. B'negei Yerusha, relevant to the concept of inheritance, Yadua Bir Hagoyin Haragachavar. The Rebbe cites very often the Ragachavar, and the Rebbe says, in accordance with the Ragachavar's explanation of Yerusha, Shehayirish Einai Mitzius Acheres Hamikabeles Nechasim Min Hamayrish, that the heir is not a separate entity that receives something from the principal party, Ella B'lashon HaKasuv, but rather in how the pasuk says in Tehillim, Tachas avoisecha yiyu vanecha, that the children are a continuation of the parents. Hayerish oimed b'makom hamayrish. They're the memale makom. They are the placeholders, or they are in the stead of the parents. Hayerish chad hu im hamayrish. The heir is one with the person from whom they inherit. Bil shainai, in the lashon of the Ragat Shavar, etzem ha'av. They are the essence of the parent, of the father. And in like fashion, that is a relationship between the Jew and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'shleimus hanif'eles al yidei zeh sheyehudi loymei Torah mekayim mitzvos. In the completion that can be effectuated through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. What happens? Al yidei limud haTorah, through learning Torah, Yisrael araisa v'kochabrichu kulachad. The Jew, the Torah, and Hashem become one. Tlas miskashron da beda kuchabrichu araisa b'Yisrael. It becomes a three-way bond, a three-way knot. Vehem nasim kulachad, and they become one. And the same thing happens through being Mekayim mitzvahs, that a mitzvah is etymologically rooted in the word safta, which means to connect. Nasa Yehudi mitzius achas kavyochol im noisen haTorah mitzvah hamitzvahs hakadosh baruch hu ba'atzmai. So the Jew, through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, becomes one kavyochol, as it were, with the noisen haTorah and the mitzvah and the one who commands the mitzvahs. V'zehu hapshat b'maimer lahanchil oyava yesh. And now we're in a position to understand the pshat, the true understanding of this utterance, or this pasuk, lahanchil oyava yesh. Harambam mivar shaloshen yesh. The Rambam explains that this term yesh, which up until now we have understood as in accordance with its gematria, which is 310, that there are 310 worlds that will be bestowed upon or bequeathed to tzaddikim in the future time. The Rambam explains yesh that it's meira al mitzius hatmidis asher ein la tachlis. That what will this person, the Oyavei Hashem, the Oyavai, the ones that Hashem calls those that love me, what will they come into? What will they inherit? What will be bequeathed to them? Yesh. And what is yesh? A continuous and infinite existence that has no end. Hashem. That's the only thing that can be described as such. Lahanchil oyava yesh pirushay. So what does it mean that those that love me will inherit yesh? La'oyhavai, to those that love me, anchil, I will bequeath as hayesh hamuchlat, the absolute existence. Ki chol nefesh tiske l'chaya olam haba lo'isichla la'olam, because every soul that will merit chaye olam haba, the life of the world to come, will never cease to be, will come into this God-like feature of absolute, infinite, and continuous existence. The question, of course, is, Keitzad yochol nivra bal gvul litfais b'yesh hamuchlat b'metzias hatmidis inishal nitzchis ubilti bal gvul. How, in fact, is it possible for a creation, a limited creation, how is it possible for that kind of creation to be fused with and to come into the absolute existence, the continuous existence, the infinite existence, that which has no parameters, that which has no delineation? How is that possible even? Al kach mivara kasuv. That is precisely why the pasuk comes and elucidates and explains and underscores umadgish lahanchil oyavayesh. True, through your own efforts and through your own overtures and through your own avodah, you can never reach this. You can never earn this, not even in 100 million lifetimes. But you can inherit this, because inheritance is not contingent on who you are and what you do. It flows naturally and automatically. Yisrael mekablim zois loy b'turas mekabel min hanoisein. And so the Jew gets this not as something that one gives the other, mitzius hacheres hanoiteles min hanoisein, that one existence takes it from the other that is giving it, because then there would have to be some parity. In other words, you can only give something to somebody with whom you share features. You can't whisper in the ears of an ant your feelings, because they're not going to be able to accept that because they don't have the ability to accept your feelings. So there has to be some level of parity, of equality for one to give to another. Or to take even a simple example, you want to put a gallon of liquid somewhere, you have to find a kli makabel. You have to have a receptacle that can hold a gallon. So the Rebbe is explaining that it's not possible for the infinite to bequeath to the finite. I'm sorry, to give, because to give, there has to be parity. But if it's Yerusha, if it's an inheritance, then those rules don't apply, which is why a 1-day-old baby can, according to the laws of inheritance, inherit billions of dollars. I don't know, whatever comes after billions, whatever it is, trillions, because they don't have to understand what's in the bank. They don't have to understand how stocks and options and futures work or what they should invest in. They don't have to understand any of it. Yeah. Mashi's saying, so we say Mada'ani every day, my Rasha Kehilas Yaakov. These are all the inyanim of that it's all, it comes to us automatically, not because of anything we did. Yisrael mekablim zois loy b'toras mekabel min hanoisein mitzios acheres hanateles min hanoisein. We're not an independent existence, and we get it from another. Eli Yisrael noichalim zois b'toras yeresh. But it's bequeathed to us as an inheritance. And why can it be bequeathed as an inheritance? Asher chad hu him amayrish. Because as the Ragachav explains, because the ear is one with the one who is bequeathing. Yisrael bon imheim l'kutchabrichu. We are children. V'lachein kasher Yehudi loy meitar mekayim mitzvahs. Therefore, when a Jew learns Torah and observes mitzvahs, mizgala shuhu mitzias achas im yesh hamuchlat amiti. So it's revealed what a Jew is, which is that they are one existence with the only true and absolute existence, mitzias hatamitis, the one constant existence. Oisiatem leichem. The lashon is that you're taking me. You're not taking my Torah. You're not taking my mitzvahs. You're taking me. You're grasping me. Move on. And from once we understand this, it's understood. Now we can go back to more closely inspect or try to understand more deeply what is the pleasure that comes to the tzaddikim. Asher zehu haperish b'divrei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asir hakadosh baruch hu lahanchel l'chol tzaddik b'tzaddik shai olamais. That the way that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi expresses, he says in the future Hashem will give to every tzaddik 310 worlds. So Kafisha Mivar Rambam, the Rambam looks at this and explains, Shekavanas hadvarim hi, that what the intention here is, Shahatainug me'a'ilam haba, hu shleish me'as pam be'eser pa'amim, kol ha'tanugas ha'ilam hazeh. That what this Mishnah means is that the joy and the pleasure of the world to come is 310 times the pleasure that can be felt or experienced or amassed in this world. And the Rebbe explains, Ein zeha oineg shel hatzadikim kefi shehim la'atzmam. So what does this mean conceptually? In other words, if you take it literally, like we would say amongst Hasidim, grabaheit, if you take it on a crass level, so it has to mean that the sushi in Olam Haba is 310 times better than sushi spot, and this is 310 times more pleasurable than this, v'chulei v'chulei. But no, the Rebbe says this means ein zeh einek shel hatzadikim kefi shehim la'atzmam. That this means that they come into a pleasure that is not a pleasure that is measurable by any metric that a person can conceive of, even a great tzaddik. B'lashon Chasidus, Nachas ruach lenivra, hanachas ruach haba leyehudi kischar al kim ratzon Hashem. This is not like the nachas ruach, the pleasure that a Jew derives as a reward for fulfilling the desire of Hashem. No. Elazehu hatainuk shalak kadosh baruch hu kavyachal. Nachas ruach lebayre. In other words, people derive pleasure from the feeling that you did what you were supposed to do. You could argue that it's one of the most profound and deepest pleasures of all. The pleasure that comes from knowing you're where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to be. That's a very, very, very deep pleasure. But when it says that la'asad lavei, the tzaddik will inherit 310 worlds, that everything that you can enjoy here is to the 310th power, it means that you're going from the deepest pleasure that a person could have here, even for spiritual reasons, to a pleasure that is all about Hashem's pleasure. It's got nothing to do with your pleasure. It's the pleasure that Hashem derives from your avodah. K'maimer Chazal, nachas ruach lefanai she'amarti v'naser etzeni. That Hashem has a very special pleasure from the fact that Hashem said something and we did it. Kevan sheYisrael him davar echad im hamayrish, and because we have already established we are one with Hashem, we are children, and children are a continuation of their parent. So that's why a person, a tzaddik, is able to inherit this otherworldly, infinite pleasure. And like the Rambam actually notes right here in his explanation, that the number 310 that Rabbi Shimon ben Levi cites, al derech ha'ora bavad. It's like a rhetorical device. It's just to make a point. It's not 310 as opposed to 312 or even 618. It's to make a point of how much huger it is. Avalafia emes zehu tainug bilti mugbal. But really, it's something that can't be quantified at all. And somebody put in the chat box, in fact, what is the significance of 310? And alas, I do not have an answer. And I'm not saying that there is no answer. I'm just saying I don't have an answer, not at this point. But I'll try to get one and put it into the chat. I would love to quickly look at the two asterisks at the bottom underneath the footnotes. So it comes, the first asterisk says, Umeturetz al pizeh amrukan li Yisrael. And this comes as a continuation of within footnote 44. Dimashma. What does the term Yisrael teach us? Dirak avur Yisrael hay hashalom kli machazik habracha. That when it says Lo imatza kadosh baruch hu kli machazik habracha ela hashalom, that it's dafka only for a Jew that this is being addressed to. V'loy l'shar amim, and not to the other nations. Ki kavanas Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, because the intention of Reb Shimon ben Chalafta's teaching here, eina lemalas hashalom bichlal. It's not talking about peace in the most general sense, which understandably it would apply to all people, that if people are working in tandem with each other in unison, that good and great things can be accomplished. But the Rebbe is saying that it's talking about a very specific type of shalom. It's talking about a peace that is a conduit for blessing that is specific and unique to Jewish people who are Banav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the children of God, in order for them to be Lahanchil Oyaveyesh, in order for them to come into this particular inheritance, where they go into a whole different strata, a whole different beyond this world place of infinity. And if you look across the aisle to the two asterisks, Al Pizeh move on Gamkein, and through this is understood also Gam Tchilas HaKasuv. Now we can understand the beginning of that pasuk, because the beginning of the pasuk is Hashem oiz le'ama yitain, and then comes Hashem yivarech es amay bashalom. So why do you have to cite the whole pasuk about the oiz, about the strength? Really, all you're looking about is shalom, right? Why does it cite oiz? De l'chayra ein negela inin hashalom. It l'chayra seemingly it's not negeya to this idea that we're talking about peace, strength. Ki in yana shel shalom kan, because the intention, this particular type of peace that is being discussed here, hu mashenoisen oiz b'hanivra lekabel hayesh hamuchlat, because this is talking about a very distinctive type of peace that confers upon the Jew the strength to become a recipient for this yesh hamuchlat, for this absolute existence, for this infinity, for this otherworldly, godly energy, habilti balgvul, that has no parameters and no limitations whatsoever. Oisiatem leichem, your mom is taking me, meaning Hashem. Sivav. No. Sorry. We're now going to the next page. Top of page 52 or page 6, if you have the Hebrew printed out, beginning with V'zehu ha'chiluk bein schar ha'mitzvos bein lahanchil kulei oyavayesh. Now we're in a much better position to understand the difference between schar mitzvos, which is a general idea, reward for mitzvos, and the idea of lahanchil oyavayesh, to inherit, that Hashem bequeaths upon tzaddikim, to those who love him, this idea of yesh. Chani, I saw you type something in, but I'm going to look at it. I'll read it. I'll open the chat in a minute. I'm just going to finish this. If Hatainuk haba la'adam kischar ha'avoda. So when you're talking about pleasure that comes to a person as a reward for the service that they put in, Hare kevon shekabala schar meir shemekabala schar hu metzias la'atzmai shetzarech l'shalim lo'yel. Once you're talking about schar, this insinuates that you're talking about somebody else. People don't reward themselves for what they do. They reward somebody else, a separate and distinct entity, for something that's done. And that's why shetzarech l'shalim lo'yel, because it's somebody else, you have to pay them for what they did. So once you're establishing that it's schar, you're talking about two different entities. So then harezehu tainug b'mida sha'adam kinivra yachal lekabel. Now you're talking about a limited, circumscribed type of pleasure that a person, a created feature, can accept. Mashe enkein, in contradistinction, Inyan asira kadosh baruch hu lahanchil chulei oyavayesh, when you're talking about what's going to happen in the future, that Hashem is going to bequeath upon those who love him, yesh, something that is infinite and eternal and godly and transcends all limitations, nachas ruach lebayre, not nachas ruach lenivra, but nachas ruach lebayre, initial yesh hamuchlat. This is the only true existence. Ein ze inyan shel schar mitzvah. So now you're not talking about a schar, you're not talking about a reward. Ela zehu etzem ha-mitzvah. This is not a reward on the mitzvah. This is the essence of the mitzvah. The essence of doing something for someone you love is not what they're going to give you. It's the fact that you get to do it. That's it. But this ultimate level can only come as an inheritance, because we're talking here about something that completely transcends our ability to accept it. It's only when it's nachala and the child becomes one with the parent, in the place of the parent, that you could even talk about them accepting this high level. So now let me just open the chat box. So Chani's asking, the Oz is something every Jew gets automatically, but the bracha of Shalom we have to earn. I think it's a wonderful question. I don't know that I have a wonderful answer, but what comes to me immediately, and doesn't mean that this is the answer, is that a Yid has the potential eyes. I don't know if it's something that comes, in other words, we're wired with this eyes to be able to get this bracha. So yeah, I think it's the same thing as saying it's something we get automatically. In other words, it's in our DNA. But yeah, we have to work to get the bracha. Thank you for that. Seif Zayin. And now we understand why the pasuk uses the term in Mishlei la'oy to those who love me. Because in fact, how can you alight to this level, which is like a stupendous level? Kasher gam avoidasa hi ba'ofen kazeh she'ena choshev al atzmai elahu oved l'shma bilvad l'shem hakadosh baruch hu. How can you get to this level when it's not about you? When it's only Lishma, L'Shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know what this makes me think of is that what is the constant refrain of Hasidim? What is the constant hope and the aspiration? We should be zeiche to fulfill the intention. Not we should be zeiche to get this and we should be zeiche to get that. We should be zeiche to fulfill the intention. That the only way to come into this inheritance is from a place of oihavai, from a place that's from selfless love. Kol zman she'adam choshev al inyan shel schar, oy al atzmai bichlal, al ha'aliyah sheloi. Because for as long as a person is thinking about reward, or they're thinking about themselves, or they're even thinking about their spiritually exalted level because they're doing these things, then that gets between you and the absolute existence of God. Comes a chatzitza. It comes between you and the absolute existence. It comes between you and the eternal existence. Because this is higher than any rubric and any metric and any thing of this world. It's specifically when the work is only for the sake of Hashem, legamre, completely. The person is not thinking about themselves at all. And the only thought is about the essence of the mitzvah, is about giving Hashem the nachas ruach. Azai miskayim oisiatem leichem. Then can come this inyan of you are literally taking me, and therefore and therefore you can come in to this inheritance of yesh, this stupendous level that's not quantifiable. The 310 is just a device to make us think big. Al derech shematzinu bahalacha. The Rebbe says that this is similar to a construct that we have in halacha, she'eved amiti, that a true servant, eved al piteris emes, eved as defined in Torah, eina metzias la'atzmei klal, has no self construal. They have no independent existence. The chol mitziosai him mitzios ha'adain. Their entire existence is really the existence of their master. Therefore, anything that belongs to them automatically belongs to their master, etc., etc. And now the Rebbe circles back to the beehive. That is alluded to in the Mishnah, before the Mishnah that talks about the reward, the so-called reward that the Rebbe has now disabused us of thinking about this as a reward, but rather as a consequence of doing an avodah in a certain way. Why does it follow this discussion about the honeycomb and the frenetic activity of the beehive? Ki ha'avodah shel Yisrael ba'ofen shel lishma, because this avodah of Jews, where it has nothing to do with them and only to do with God, near mezes bekach she Yisrael nimshulu ledevarim, kod isa b'medrash, b'nei Yisrael are compared to bees, like it says in the medrash, ki devarim hayu banai. My children are like bees. Ma ha'devar hazois kol ma shehi mazgelas leba'aleha. Everything that this bee collects, she collects for her boss. Kach kol ma sheYisrael misaglin mitzvos masam tevim he misaglim lavim shabashamayim. In a like fashion, everything that Bnei Yisrael collect in their Torah and mitzvahs, they do for their Father in heaven, who in the analogy is the queen bee. But I won't go down that rabbit hole right now. Okay, mevor b'lekutei Torah, and as explained in Lekutei Torah, she'avodah ba'ofen zeh novas meha'hakara asher tachlis ha'mechuvan b'vrias ha'adam eina b'shvil ha'adam atzmei levad. That this avodah flows from the recognition that the goal of Brias Ha'adam, of our entire creation, is not for us alone. Af shebe'emes aliyasei nifla ma'oid. And yes, it's true that our journey in this world leads us to a wondrous aliyah. Im kol zeh, that notwithstanding, loizu levad hu hataklis hamechuvan, that alone is not the goal. That alone is not the intention, ki em lekvoida yizbarach, but rather we are born for the glory of Hashem. O kamaymer chazal, ani nevresi l'shamash eskaini. So in some way, we are all the sterile bees running around with a straw-like feature, collecting nectar to bring back to the hive to make into the ultimate honey. So in other words, could say, and in a way, I think there's something, I mean, there's so much. I think we could bring about the Sikha every Seif for 3 weeks at the very least. But maybe one of the things we could say right here, and I don't want to editorialize too long, and we're ready, and we're not finished, is that like sometimes we might feel that we're doing, and we're not seeing, what's the point here? Like what's coming out of this? But the way, if you read that link about how honey is produced, I just found it like riveting. each bee is handing off the honey to another, the nectar to another bee, and then they're breaking it down in the enzymes of their body, and then they're regurgitating it, and then it goes to the next bee. It's like everything that we do, every person that we interface with, and everything, it's part of a much larger process, and it's not about us. It's not about like what we're going to be able to see or point to or birth, as it were, because we're sterile in the analogy. Zayin, right? No, ches. Al pizeh efshel levaer. So based on this, we can explain gam shaychus mishnah zu lepluktas beishamai ubeis Hillel b'chaleis devash. So now the Rebbe is circling back to now, in light of everything that we've said about the last Mishnah, to now unveil the deeper strata within the second to last Mishnah, the penultimate Mishnah, the last halacha in the Mishnayos about the honeycomb, ubahakdim. We have to preface B'loshen Hanal B'Likutei Torah that the Alter Rebbe in the Hasidic Parsha Likutei Torah Mudgash underscores that what's underscored in the terminology is shebepoyel magia adam al yidei avodas lamata la'aliyah nifla moed v'rak shelo zu levad hu tachlis hamachovan. Rebbe wants to bring to our attention that yes, it's true that a neshama comes to a wondrous aliyah through the avodah lamata. But this is not the only kavanah. And the Rebbe says, "Ubazeh hu hachiluk ben shitas beishamai da azlinan basa bekoyach v'shitas beisila da azlinan basa bepoyel at kama inyan zeh aliyah teifes makam." At the whole discussion about the honeycomb and when it becomes susceptible or vulnerable to impurity because it is understood to be in liquefied state is actually a thinly veiled reference or a metaphor or an analogy for parsing this deeply profound idea about why we are in this world. And according to Beis Hillel, according to Beis Shammai, we're looking at the neshama in potentia. And according to Beis Hillel, we're looking at the neshama in actuality. Let's go right into it. If we're coming from the perspective of potentia, that when you look at anything through the lens of Beis Shammai, you're always looking at the potential. Nimtza, then we find sheyiridus haneshama lamata habipoyel ena poyeles ma'ila chadosha b'neshama yesrael mashahaya la kaidim yiridasa. If you're looking from the perspective of potentia, then what is the novelty of the neshama coming into this world? What has changed about the neshama when it comes to this world? Ki iker ha'inyan hakoyach livatseya es ha'avodah lamata, because the potential to be able to concretize or bring to fruition the avodah in this world, kfar yeshna b'neshama gufa koydem yiridasa lamata. That potential is already found in the neshama before it's vested in a guf and comes down into this world. Yisera mizu, even more. Benidun didan ein tzerich afilu b'poel kifchina likoyach haneshama levatzeyas avodas lamata. And from this perspective, you wouldn't need any actualization of the potential of the neshama. Why? Ki davar baruch, because it's clear and it's already like a done deal. Shesayv tamale kol neshama shlichusa ba'almadein. It's a done deal that every neshama will, because it has to fulfill its shlichus in this world. Like it says, that no one will be banished from before Hashem. and more, and more importantly, and it's already revealed in heaven that the neshama will for sure be successful. The nimtza, and so from this perspective, shaloshitas beis shammai in mokum lemer sha'aliyah hanefla shel adam hi yisron v'chidush bavur nidreshes yiridas haneshama lemata b'poel. So in accordance with beis shammai's outlook, which is all about potential, there seems to be no place to say that this stupendous and wondrous aliyah of the person is actually novel and only attainable through the neshama coming down to the world in actuality. And if you say that, v'im kain, yiridas haneshama lamate legamer lo litzarech ha'ilus sheyischadish b'neshama. So then it comes out that the Yerida of the neshama here in this world is completely not for any ilui that the neshama, any elevation that the neshama will experience. Elarak l'sage levala. The neshama is coming down like a sterile bee just to collect nectar. Liba'aleha, for the boss lady. Kidei lahashlim es kavanasa shel Kadosh Baruch Hu, to fulfill the will of Hashem. Mashenis Abba Kadosh Baruch Hu liyasei dir b'tachteinim. The Hashem has this desire to have a dir b'tachteinim. Well, l'shem inyan zeh lo yidai b'kach sheyesh b'koyach hanasham malases dir. Ela hatachtein tzarich l'shtaneis b'pearl kidei liyas dir lo yisbarach. So, in order to fulfill Hashem's will, l'sage leba'aleha, the neshama has to come down to the tachtain because that's what the Eibishter wants. And therefore, so yes, the neshama has to come down and it has to be vested in a body, but it's not for the aliyah of the neshama, because from the perspective of Beis Shammai, it's a done deal, because it's all about potential. And every neshama has the potential to turn this world inside out and upside down and elevate it. And so therefore, and the Eibishter already knows that this is all going to happen, because because no Jew will be left behind, because no neshama will remain lacking. So it's all done. Elamai, but what? But the neshama has to come down because that's the system that the Eibishter created, and that's how the Eibishter wants it, but not because, the neshama is going to be changed by it. It's only l'sage leva'aleha. It's simply to collect for the boss. Masha enkein l'shitas Beis Hillel, but in contradistinction, according to the world outlook of Beis Hillel, there's the azlinan bas b'peil, that we're looking at what's in actuality. Nimtza. So from this perspective, we find she'iridas haneshama lemata michadeshes u'poeles maila gam b'neshama maila shloi haisa b'mikoidem. That coming down into this world affords the neshama a novel, exalted level that was not found earlier, that she did not have earlier. Ki dafka yidei lamata hi moitzia es koichaseh min hakoich el hapoel u'lashitas Beis Hillel zehu ikar b'chol ha'inyan. Because it's only by coming down to this world that the neshama is able to bring out the potential into actuality. And in accordance with Beis Hillel's outlook, the whole thing is about actual. The whole thing is about when you actually crush the honeycomb. It's not about when you start thinking that you could crush the honeycomb or you could start smoking out the bees. V'lachein l'shitas Beis Hillel, af al pi she'ikar inyan shel yiridas haneshama lemata hu l'chvaydo yisbarach ani nivreis l'shamash es koini kedei lahashlam es hakavana l'dir b'tachteinim v'zu tzricha liyos kavanas ha'adam b'avodas. So the Rebbe says, but understand, according to Beis Hillel, it's also that the main reason for the neshama is for Hashem's glory. To come down to this world is ach v'rak for Hashem's glory. Not ach v'rak, but it's mainly for Hashem's glory. Because ani nivreis l'shamash es kaini, and it's in order to bring to fruition the kavan of dir b'tachteinim. And this has to be the kavana of every Jew when they're serving Hashem. But mikol makai, but still in all, avodas lamata hi inin shepoyel chidush gam ba'adam. But still in all, Beis Hillel maintains that the avodah that we do in this world does create a novel level in the neshama. Tess. So, in accordance with the differences between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, as that the Rebbe has now explained to us. So, in accordance with this, we can now understand another argument between these two Balei Plukta, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Halalu, these, referring to Beis Shammai, it would have been easier for a person to not be born than to be born. V'halalu, and the other is Beis Hillel, it would be better or easier for a person to be born than to not be born. Nimnu, they voted. V'gamru, and they concluded. That in fact it would be easier for a person not to be born than to be born. But achshav shenivra, but now once a person was born, and we know, right, that bal karcha chai, nobody asked us. We're born against our will. Once you're here, yifashvesh b'masav. You have to constantly take inventory of what we're doing, of our actions. Now, B'lekutei Tershan, Mivur Hapshat b'Maimer Chazal Zeh. So Alter Rebbe explains this Maimer Chazal, and he says, Loi Amru Toiv Loi Shaloi Nivra. The Gemara doesn't say it would be better for the person not to have been born. Because for sure, there is something amazingly wonderful that happens for the neshama through its descent into this world. Because only through descending into this world can the neshama be zeicha to an aliyah that has no end. So Alter Rebbe says it doesn't say lo toiv. It says el apshatu noyach v'kal hayaloi shaloi nivra. It would be easier not to be born. Not everything that's easy is better. Noyach, it would be more comfortable. It would be easier. Why? Because in the words of the Alter Rebbe, the main intention in our being born is not to work for ourselves and to get a prize. The reason we come into this world is to serve our master. And what's the problem with this? This is the hardest thing in the world, to work selflessly. And so clearly it would be easier and more comfortable to not have to do this. So now, once we understand what the tachlis hakavana is, so the Rebbe says, Lefiza Eila She'ela. So now we have a new question. Mahahava mina shel Beis Hillel loymar shenoyach v'kalei la'adam shenivra yosem mishalei nivra. So once we understand, it's so simple. We can all wrap our brains around this. That it's very hard to work selflessly. So Beis Shammai is saying it would have been easier not to have been born. So what's the havamina? What is even the consideration on the part of Hillel to say that it's easier to be born? In which way is it easier to be born? The Rebbe says explanation is Lefi Beis Shammai. Achin pashut milachatchila shekol inin yiridas haneshama lamata hu lo b'shvil aliyas haneshama ela rak lechvayda yizbarach. Because when you're coming from the perspective of Beis Shammai, it's pashut that there's lechatchila, there's no benefit to the neshama coming down. It's only for Hashem. Why? Because everything's according to potential. And anything that the neshama is going to accomplish in this world is already in the neshama potentially when it's above. So when it comes down, it's all about Hashem. Ukanal, Shalashem Aliyas Haneshama Ein Zerich B'Yerida B'Poel El B'Koyach Masbik. Like the Rebbe has already explained, from the perspective of Beis Shammai, there's no need to come down because it's all there already at potential. Umamela Pashat Shenoyach Leila Adam Shalai Never B'Chulei Ki Avuroi Loi Nasa Chidish Al Yidei Yerida Silamata. So of course Beis Shammai is going to say that for a person it would be easier not to come down, because the person his neshama has nothing to gain from coming down. And if it's all about l'chvoida yisbarach, this is a very, very hard avodah. Masha'en came in contradistinction l'das beis Hillel, ish mokum loymar shenoich le'la'adam shenivra yotzim mishalei nivra. But from the perspective of beis Hillel, there is room to say it makes sense to say that it's easier for a person to be born. Ki ilule nivra, because if a person is not born, loy haisa, loy kol, shaychus, lo isa aliyah gedola b'neflal ein gates. Because it's very simple. Because without being born, the neshama has no connection at all to this infinite, incomparable aliyah that can only be effectuated in this world. And because it is so, Hare Hatainuk Sheyesh L'Neshama Me'aliyah Zu Gadol Harbe Yoser Mitzar Haneshama B'Yeridasa Lamata. And therefore, it's understood that whatever pain or anxiety or fear or difficulty that the neshama has, it has to come down to such a world, is eclipsed by the pleasure that the neshama has from coming down to this world and entering into this yichud nifla with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is the nigun that we sing. Neshama yeredes lamata b'tzayekes I. The neshama comes down and she's screaming, ouch, it hurts. But yerida zu l'tzayach aliyah. But the neshama consoles herself that it's only through this yerida that she could get this aliyah. So the pain of the yerida, the Rebbe explains, is canceled out by the aliyah. Ad asher noyach l'shanivra. So much so that it's easier to be born than not to be born. Because the neshama senses that coming down will bring it this unquantifiable aliyah, which comes with a very, very strong pleasure, irrespective of the pain that's part of the process. And that's why it's easier and more comfortable than to not be born. Because if he wouldn't be born, he'd have no shaychus to this yichud nifla. But let's go back now to the original Gemara. But after they voted and they concluded, that in truth, when all is said and done, it's better not to be born. But although it's true that the neshama will experience a aliyah that is so great, it is without an end, it's unquantifiable. But that's not what we're supposed to be focusing on. But we're supposed to be doing this work not for ourselves, not to get a prize, not to get a reward, klal, at all. But it should be just to serve the master, without thinking about ourselves and what we're going to get out of it. And because this is such an almost impossible thing to achieve, better that we shouldn't have to have this.
Rivky, 1 sec. I'm sorry. I know I should write, but I just can't. Sorry. So, very fast. So according to Beis Shammai, it doesn't matter if a person is Mekayim Torah mitzvahs or does anything. In a way, it's like more positive than the Beis Hillel. Like, what's he say? I missed the point. Maybe I wasn't
No,
looking
it's not
inside.
about that it does. Okay, it's not about that it doesn't matter. Because no, the Rebbe is saying Beis Shammai, because everything about Beis Shammai is that as soon as there's the potential, you treat it as it has actualized already. As soon as you start thinking that you're going to get the honey out of the honeycomb, it's already Mekabel Tuma as a mashke. So therefore, there is no Yisrin, there's nothing extra that the neshama gets when it comes down. It's not the pshat that it's not going to come down. It's not the pshat that it's not going to do mitzvahs. But mitzat potentially, yidach mimenu nidach. No Jew will be left behind. No neshama will be left behind. So it's already like a done deal from the perspective of potential. But it's not that it doesn't matter if it's not going to do Torah mitzvahs. It's that it will do Torah mitzvahs. It will get done. And so therefore, the neshama, before it even comes down, already has that status. And so then what's the aliyah that comes to the neshama from coming down? So the Rebbe is explaining. So from this perspective, it's about what the Eibishter wants from the neshama, not about what the neshama achieves. And that's why Beis Shammai says, better than neshama shouldn't come down. Beis Hillel is all about, it's only a mashke, it only is mekabel tuma when you actually liquefy the honey. You crush the honeycomb. The neshama comes down and does its avodah. And only then is there this yichud nifla. And it's a novel thing. And still in all, this shouldn't be our focus. And the Rebbe is going to address that.
Rivky,
Yeah.
is it saying better or easier?
Thank you. So the Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe is drawing our attention to the fact that it's not saying better, it's saying easier.
Okay.
Yeah. Yud. V'zui gam hashaychos shel hamishna chalois dvash l'mishna acharina asik hashbaruch lahanchel. So the Rebbe keeps deepening and broadening our understanding of the confluence of these two Mishnayos. Tchila huva b'Mishnah pluktas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel im azlinin basar b'koyach azlinin basar b'payel. First, we have the Mishnah, which brings us a plukta between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, if we're going to focus on potential or we're going to focus on actuality. Asher lefi zeh hayamokim lemeshel edas Beis Hillel aliyas v'schar adam hi ikaratam oyel kaponim tam shaveh liyiridas lemata. So if you're looking from the potential, when you're looking for the potential of actuality, Ladas Beis Hillel, then the aliyah and the schar of the person is maybe the main thing, or at least equal in his coming down. The Hemshech HaMishnahu, but the end of the Mishnah, B'dugmas Nimnu V'Gamru, like conceptually that other Gemara that says, but there was a vote taken and it was concluded, what comes after? Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Asad Ekshbarka Lahanchil. I have a yesh. That l'chule alma b'mishnah hakademis, and everybody has to agree, everybody in the earlier Mishnah, even Hillel, who's all about actuality, Gam Ladas Beis Hillel, that mataras v'tachlis havodah shel haneshama lamata he loy haschar v'haliyah shala, right? Because Beis Hillel is all about the actuality, which would seem to point to the aliyah that the neshama gets from coming down here. But even Beis Hillel agrees. Nimnu v'gomru. They took a vote and everybody concluded unanimously. So Rebbe says the same thing is happening in the second Mishnah as it follows the one before. The one before gives us an argument, but the last Mishnah gives us the concluding vote. And what's the concluding vote? Lahanchil yesh. That kimoy hadvashel hadvarim. That just like the honey of the bees, l'sage liba'aleha, is all about gathering the honey for the boss. It's all to fulfill the desire and the intention of Hashem. And this all comes to a crescendo in the way that the neshama unifies kavyochel with the only true and eternal and constant existence. Afal pikein ein perish hadavar shlo yel neshama schar v'aliyah klal. But the understanding here, despite the fact that we understand what's the ultimate kavana, but don't misunderstand, because the pshat here is not that the neshama will have no schar and no aliyah at all. Elagam zois yeh. But this too will happen. In other words, even as the neshama is completely dedicated to doing it just for Hashem, just for Hashem, just for Hashem, but there is also the facet or the dimension of her own aliyah and her own schar. V'lachein hevi Reb, to matter with me, Reb Yeshua ben Levi gam as hemshech pasuk, and therefore he brings the second half of the pasuk after he brings down that this is all about coming into inheritance, which doesn't have to do anything with your avodah, and you're coming into a transcendent place, a level. But what does he bring down? What does the end of the pasuk say? V'oitzrei say hem, and their storehouses, amale, I will fill. Dikoi, this refers to ala oitze shel hatzadikim ba'olam hazeh, that the Eibishter, so in other words, in addition to the unquantifiable, infinite, godlike, transcendent reward that we are bequeathed, because it's not shaykh for us to get it, there is also the reward that we will get that will fill our storehouses, as it were. Kevan shakadosh baruch hu einay mikafeach schar kol beria, because the Eibusher doesn't default or withhold on any reward for any creation. Zeiche gam haneshama l'inishal schar kinifra. So the neshama is also zeiche to a different kind of schar, a quantifiable type of schar. Aval Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi loy hevias inin v'yitzasei amale beguf ma'amore. But the Rebbe says, but pay attention. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi did not introduce this in his original teaching, where he says, Aseh Baruch Hu lahanchil chule. He didn't say ulamale etzaseyim. Ela rak b'derech agav behevia es haposuk lahanchil oyaveyesh. When he gives us a teaching of what the Eibush is going to do, he doesn't refer to this secondary reward. But when he brings the citation, the pasuk, to bolster his teaching, he does bring it there. So the fact that he brings it means that it must be brought, it's important. But the fact that he doesn't include it in the original teaching means that it's secondary. Ki guf hamaymer esek beikar hashlemas l'asid. Because the main body of what he wants to teach us is talking about the ultimate reward in the future. And in order to also relate and allude to the schar that the neshama gets, that comes to us secondary, and really can't hold a candle to the main reward, which is to become one with the absolute existence. So he brings down these words also. Yud Aleph. The Rebbe concludes, and there's one more thing the Rebbe says, and I want to tell you about this. We know that in the time to come, the halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai. And one of the explanations for why this is so, in accordance with what we did today, because bisman hazeh kasher adam chashes mitziosai, because in this present time, when we feel ourselves, we feel our own existence, it's almost impossible for us to be selfless, free of ego and our own agenda. Halacha kebeis Hillel. Halacha is like Beis Hillel. V'nemar la'adam shabedasa pe'elas aliyah gam boy. And Hillel is teaching us that we will also get an aliyah. In other words, we need to be incentivized. We need to be motivated by the fact that there's something in there for us as we feel ourselves distinct in our selfhood. Masha enkein la'asid lavai, but in contradistinction, when Mashiach comes, kasher yikuyim v'nigla k'vayt Hashem v'ro kabasa yachdav kipi Hashem diber, when it will come to fruition that the glory of Hashem will be revealed, and all flesh will see together that the mouth of Hashem has spoken of Bnei Yisrael yisachdu b'poel im yesh hamuchlad, and Bnei Yisrael will be factually and practically united with the absolute existence of Metzias HaTmidis and the constant existence. Azai Metzias Adam loy titfeis mokem klal. Then we won't figure it all. It's like, in the orb of the sun, there are no rays. We're going to be part of the orb. And then the only thing will be to come to inherit this superlative fusion with Hashem that is only possible via Yerusha, not Nesina. Rabbi Yehuda ben Levi Gufa Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Gufa shediber al azman del asid ubazeh Gufa basim hamashnayis maimed adam laachre gemar ha'avoda. So that's why Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who is speaking about the future time, he's speaking about the culmination. He's speaking about perfection. B'matzav d'shleimus hatzadik loy amar ella ha'asir hakadosh baruch hu lahanchil l'kol tzadik v'tzadik. He only talked about that higher level. Ella sheme'acha shasayif kol sof limud hamishnu ba'olam hazeh. But bottom line, after all is said and done, we're learning these mishnayos in this world, neshamas and gufim, and we do feel ourselves. Hevi Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi gam esiyam hakasov va'etzresehem amale. I will fill their storehouses. She'yimale kadosh baruch hu gam es etzresehem shel hatzadikim. That in addition to what will happen, and in addition to coming into something that cannot be quantified and cannot be qualified because it's otherworldly, because it's infinite, there will also be the filling of the storehouses. We'll be able to see something more tangible, something we can reference, something we can point to, something that we could take a more, you could say, maybe even selfish pleasure in. I mean, and we're not talking about like, oh my gosh, you're so horribly selfish. We're talking about maybe that the selfhood can recognize it and point to it. And that is our sikha for today. And it's just, I don't know, I just like, I keep thinking about how crazy privileged we are. Like, who learns Torah on this level? Like, really? Beehives? Honeycombs? It's just incredible. Just incredible.
Rivky, I want to ask a question. I may have missed this, but